Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of stories affecting the Sikh community around the world. And today we have important updates on the plight of two of India's political prisoners, Amritpal Singh and Jagtar Singh Johal, that both highlight the failings of two independent governments. Firstly, the Indian Govt, who confirmed their failings as a democracy as they admit they are terrified of allowing Amritpal to speak again in public. And of course, the British Govt, who simply confirm, well, their failings in just about everything. Trust me, it makes shocking but unsurprising news. All this and more on today's show, but joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. Again, comments are always coming in, and they're amazing, and we appreciate all of the time that you take to not only send the comments, but there's a lot of thought and a lot of articulation within those. And don't forget that we always welcome your story ideas and your input. So again, be a part of the show. And don't forget that coming up in January will be the hard launch of our live. We will be going live in January by all looks at the schedule. That seems to be the plan. So we may do some live shows in between now and then, just kind of working out some tweaks and doing what we call the soft launch. But other than that, folks, you'll be able to call in during the show and be even more a part of it. So let us know where you're watching from. Let us know what you think, and if there's anything that you want us to cover in this in the next few weeks or into the new year, by all means, be a part of it and throw us your ideas. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed, and if you do like to watch things technically fall apart in live motion, why not tune into our live shows as they tend to do so. But in the meantime, James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And indeed, as always, we'll take a look at loads of great comments which filled up below the videos from last week and earlier this week at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, James, what have you got to start us off with this morning?
Well, Angus, it appears that there's the old saying that you only live once, and then, of course, that's followed by you only die once. However, for one Sikh hero, it turns out that maybe he has come back and died again, living a second life. It's hard to say. In the last few days, I've been talking about Lieutenant Colonel Amritpal Singh Johal, and it turns out that although there are stories spreading all through Surrey here about his passing last weekend, I did a great amount of research on this individual because I was very fascinated by his story from the little bits that I did know. And it turns out that everything that I've read and been able to pull up leads me to find out that he actually passed 9 years ago. And people are just talking about it this week and saying that he passed this past weekend. But no, that would have made him 105 years old. He was actually 95 at his passing. And that's the even funnier part, or more bizarre part, is that people were talking about him passing this past weekend at the age of 95. Again, it all seemed to come back to one site that I won't mention just because, somebody seems to have got wrong and it just kind of took on a life of its own. But again, I'm glad that it did in a way because it gives us the opportunity to honor this individual who not only was a stellar representative of the Sikh community and people when it came to military skill, prowess, dedication, commitment, and achievement, but also in terms of his ongoing need to fight for what was right in society, not to allow people to be held back. And of course, we know that he was instrumental in the implementation of a policy that allowed Sikhs to wear their turbans inside of the Royal Canadian Legion halls, and also set the precedence for years later when the hijab was going to be banned and other articles of faith. And again, this would have been in certain areas such as taking the Canadian citizenship swearing-in ceremony, things like that. And again, he stood up for what was right, even though it was for other religions and beliefs at that time, because he'd already been through the challenge with the Royal Canadian Legion. Now, it just fascinates me, this whole story. And I'm going to just kind of read off a bit of what I wrote here, and I am going to read it because I did quite a bit of research and I will forget some points. So I'm just going to touch on it as we go here. And this will be the only story I cover tonight because it's just so fascinating that this individual accomplished so much. And there is a book about him, and I'll cover that at the end as well. You won't believe who it was that wrote the foreword for that book. Now, the morning of November the 11th, 1993, in Surrey, British Columbia, was marked by the damp, penetrating chill characteristic with our Pacific Northwest in late autumn. The low slate gray clouds hung over the municipality, a rapidly growing suburb of Vancouver that was fast becoming the epicenter of the South Asian diaspora in Canada. It was Remembrance Day, the sacred hour in our Commonwealth calendar when the living pause to honor the dead, when the silence of the 11th hour binds nations across oceans in a shared memory of sacrifice. For Lieutenant Colonel Amritpal Singh Johal, a 73-year-old veteran of the Second World War, this day was intended to be a solemn affirmation of his identity, both as a soldier who had served the British Empire and as a new Canadian who had chosen this land for his twilight years. Johal was a man of imposing dignity, standing at 6 feet tall with a beard that spoke of wisdom and a spine stiffened by 38 years of military discipline. He wore the uniform of a commanding officer, his chest adorned with a rack of medals that told the story of the 20th century. The Africa Star, the War Medal, the India Service Medal, and on his head he wore the Death Star. The turban, maroon in color, meticulously tied, the crown of his Sikh faith. He was not alone. Flanking him were 4 other distinguished veterans of the Indian Army. Honorary Captain Mahar Singh Baring, Flying Officer Harbhajan Singh Manhouse, and Subedar Paran Singh Saran, and Havildar Wariam Singh Baines. They had been invited. The Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 175 in Newton, British Columbia, had placed advertisements in local community newspapers extending the hand of camaraderie to all veterans to join in the parade and to honor those who had served and those who were still serving. The subsequent gathering was to be held at the Royal Legion Hall. To Johal, a man raised on the regimental code of honor, an invitation was a command of hospitality. He had even performed a reconnaissance mission 3 days prior on November the 8th, visiting the branch to ensure his dress, specifically his turban, would be acceptable. The parade commander, Mr. Arnie Bayliss, had given him the all-clear. Yet, as the parade concluded and the veterans marched towards the Legion Hall, the warmth of the invitation evaporated. The Sikh veterans approached the lounge entrance, expecting a handshake of brothers in arms. Instead, they were met by a crossed-arm exclusion. That was Frank Underwood, the president of the Newton branch, stood at the door. He cited bylaws dating back to 1946 that there's to be no headgear in the lounge. To Underwood and his executive committee, the turban was a hat, and wearing a hat indoors was a sign of disrespect to the fallen. And to Johal, the turban was his head, his honor, and a covenant of his guru that could not be broken. He stated, "We fought together," Johal said, his voice laced with incredulity of a man who had seen men die in desert sands for the very freedoms he was now being denied. And here we are. You go in the room, I stay outside. Is that the treatment I should be given as a veteran, he said. The door remained closed. The 5 veterans were left standing on the sidewalk, humiliated in full view of the public and the media, while white veterans and women wearing berets streamed past them into the warmth of the hall. This moment froze in the cool air of a Surrey morning. It would spark a national firestorm. It would drag the Royal Canadian Legion, a bastion of tradition, often colonial Canadian identity, into the confrontation with the multicultural reality of a nation it served. It would launch Johal and his final and perhaps most significant campaign, a battle not against the Axis powers, but against ignorance and institutional racism. The following report that I generated actually chronicles the life of Lieutenant Colonel Amritpal Singh Johal. We won't be able to cover it all tonight, but I will post the entirety on our Substack page. I do have a few other articles from the last few days to get up there as well, so we'll get those up there by the time the show airs tonight, or today, sorry. But when you look at from the dusty villages of the British Raj to the battlefields of North Africa and finally to the steps of the Royal Canadian Legion, it was the latter that showed the most disrespect. It was a story of a soldier who fought for the empire that colonized him and then fought the country that adopted him in. And all to secure a simple fundamental right, and that was the dignity of his faith. To understand the magnitude of the insult leveled at him in 1993, one must first journey back to the world that made him. Amritpal Singh Johal was born around 1920 in the village of Johal in the Jalandhar region of the Punjab in India. The exact date was not recorded, a commonality for rural families in the chaotic, vibrant landscape of British India. Jalandhar lies in the heart of the Doaba region, a fertile tract of land between the Beas and Sutlej rivers, known historically as the sword arm of India. For centuries, the land had produced soldiers, the Sikh martial tradition, which Johal inherited by birth and by conviction, was not merely a cultural affection but a theological mandate. The 10th Sikh Guru, Gobind Singh, had established the Khalsa, the Brotherhood of the Pure, in 1699, commanding his followers to always be ready to defend the weak and fight tyranny. He bestowed upon them 5 articles of faith, and that was the 5 Ks, which Kesh, uncut hair, covered by the dastar, which is the turban, was the most visible. The turban was not a hat, it was a spiritual crown. A symbol that the Sikh answered only to God, acknowledging no earthly tyrant. It represented sovereignty, self-respect, and moral responsibility. A Sikh does not doff his turban for a king, nor does he remove it to pray. He wears it to cover his uncut hair, the preservation of which is an acceptance of God's will. When we look at this, there's just so much history and so much information here. As I said, I will post it all up, but I'm going to skip ahead a bit to the battle that he had with the Royal Canadian Legion, because I think that it's really quite telling. But it also really impressed me how far that he took this battle and how far he took the whole principle of what was behind it. Now, of course, we know that those doors that closed on him were eventually opened, but it took a lot of organizing of the veterans and others. Now, he refused to be invisible. He sought out others like him, men of the Indian Army who had retired to Canada. He found them in the suburbs of Vancouver, captains, subedars, and havildars, men with chests full of medals who were now driving taxis or working in sawmills. They were isolated, their service unrecognized by Canadian veteran establishments. Johal forged the Indian Ex-Servicemen Society of British Columbia. The organization became a sanctuary. They gathered to share stories, to help each other navigate the bureaucracy of a new land, and to march. They wanted to march on Remembrance Day, to lay wreaths at the cenotaphs, to show their new country that they too had paid the price of freedom. Now, the social climate for the Sikhs in Canada reached the boiling point in 1990 when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the very icon of Canadiana, faced a challenge from a young recruit who we've talked about many times on our show, and his name is Baljit Singh Dhillon. Dhillon, an observant Sikh, refused to replace his turban with the Stetson hat. The debate that follows was ugly, but petitions with hundreds of thousands of signatures circulated demanding the preservation of the traditional uniform. And the pins stating keep the RCMP Canadian were sold at malls. The government of Brian Mulroney, relying on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, eventually ruled in Dhillon's favor. And again, we've covered this in great lengths over the years, and we've had the pleasure to meet now Senator Dhillon here in Canada. But the sequence of events leading to the confrontation of Branch 175 of the Legion was tragic in its avoidability. The Newton Legion had actively sought the participation of the Sikh veterans. They organized and recognized the visual power of having these dignified, decorated men in the parade, and that added weight to the ceremony. When they were refused entry, it was even a bigger slap in the face in that they had been invited, that he had done his reconnaissance and went there days ahead of time to make sure that his uniform and his method of dress, including his turban as a major sign of his religion and a part of his character and himself. Yeah, it was just so disgusting that they turned and refused him entry. Now, he went on that they also stated that by wearing the turban or any type of headdress in the Legion was not only disrespectful to the fallen soldiers and those who had served, but disrespectful to the crown. Of course, Canada being a commonwealth of the crown, this was very interesting in the conversation. Now, the conversation went very similar to this, and he stated, "You cannot enter with that on," Underwood said, pointing to the turban. Johal tried to explain, "This is not a hat. This is a religious requirement. We fought in this. We died in this." Underwood replied, "Rules are rules. Out of respect for the Queen and the fallen, gentlemen remove their hats." The absurdity of this statement hung in the air. Johal pointed to the women entering the hall. "They are wearing berets. Is that not headgear?" he said. "Ladies are exempt," came the reply. The veterans were turned away. They stood on the sidewalk, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifting out from the hall that they were barred from. The humiliation was not just emotional, it was physical. And he went on to state that, "I've never for a moment imagined that when I retired at the age of 73 years old, I shall be insulted, embarrassed, and humiliated in public, and that too at the hands of fellow veterans." So you can see that it really had a profound impact on him. And instead of going home and just ignoring it, he went on to be a force for change. He didn't just go and talk to individuals. It became a media firestorm across Canada. It was front page headlines in the Vancouver Sun, the Globe and Mail newspapers, and other media sources were camped out on his lawn to get the story. They looked at it as a very important subject, and especially at the time that it had to do with the Royal Canadian Legion, a very Canadian iconic name and what it represented, and the fact that they were being racist towards people who fought for the crown, that fought side by side, and yet were being disrespected and not allowed into the Legion that is supposed to be there to honor all service members. So it became a very big story. Now, as for the part about the crown, he actually reached out to Buckingham Palace and wrote the Queen herself and asked for clarification if this was in fact the wearing of the turban into the Legion, if she in fact felt that was disrespectful, or if it was, or if it was okay, because he felt that the Queen had always honored the turban, that she always honored the Sikhs who served, and that was very concerning, that they were using her as one of the reasons for him not being able to enter, or his comrades from India and from the World War II. She actually did receive that letter. She not only did she receive it, she had one of her assistants write back, and that was really telling because, as he had requested about it being a sign of respect for the sovereign, she wrote back stating that no, this was not acceptable, and she actually also sent a copy of the letter to Ottawa and said, essentially, fix this. Not in those words, but that's essentially what happened. Now, this did end up going on to be resolved eventually, but it took a long time. Not only that, but they held a vote at the Legion because it is a democratic facility and organization. The vote actually was turned down. They voted against the turban acceptance, but it did actually, in August of 1994, the Dominion Command invoked its emergency powers. They overrode the convention vote, and they initiated the order and directive that the religious headwear is allowed at that point forward. Now, they are when you look at the Newton branch here in Surrey, and again, being such a huge Sikh population, you would think that they would have had more understanding and more acceptance and more tolerance, but they didn't at that time. However, the local leadership at the Newton branch, 175, was now isolated and shamed. And they capitulated. Frank Underwood, the man who had blocked the door, went on BC TV, which is now global news in BC. He looked in the camera and read a statement that Johal long waited to hear. And that was, on behalf of the executive committee of our Legion, I apologize to all concerned Sikh war veterans for the embarrassment and inconvenience caused to them by the application of the long-standing headdress bylaws. It was an unconditional surrender. Johal accepted it with grace. He did not gloat. He simply walked through the door of the Legion. Now, what I love is that you would think that with that letter from the Queen, that would be the end of it for the Crown and for that part. However, on August the 20th, 1994, Queen Elizabeth II was visiting Victoria, British Columbia for the Commonwealth Games, and she personally requested his presence for a tea ceremony, as well as other Sikh veterans who had been turned away. So Johal, barring Minhas, Saran, and Baines, attended a garden party at the government house, and the Queen was there wearing a hat. She approached the men in their turbans. She stopped and spoke to them, and she asked about their medals. She also asked directly about the Legion incident. She asked them, did they deny you entry? Johal responded, yes, Your Majesty. She nodded, and according to Johal, remarked that he had done a wise thing, writing to her. So again, she gave him respect and a nod, saying that together we made a difference, but it wouldn't have been anything without him reaching out to her and making that change and putting that pressure on the Canadian government as well as the Royal Canadian Legion. So I thought that was very impressive. And as we scroll down, these are actually images that were shared from his private collection of his photographs. And again, this is a picture of them there getting to meet the Queen, and what an honor that is, especially for her to personally invite these Sikh warriors and heroes to that tea ceremony with her. So again, that was amazing. Now, of course, when we pulled out all the research here, it turns out that all the newspapers, all the news coverage across Canada actually honored his passing in 2016. So again, he apparently lived twice, died twice, but we will honor him forever. And I just still felt a movement that I needed to share his story and what his accomplishments were. Again, there were so many that I can't list them all here in one little show or one little segment of the show. Here you can see him being presented in British Columbia with the then Gordon Campbell, who was the Premier of British Columbia. You can see him receiving Community Achievement Awards. And here on the bottom right is a plaque that now still hangs in the Cloverdale Legion just down the road from me. And that went up in 2006 and still is there today to honor him. And here he is again. He received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012. So again, in closing, though, I will leave it with that. But again, I will put this entire report on our Substack for you to read, because I really think that it's worth taking the time to read it. And you can also find out about him through the book that I found, and that was through the University of the Fraser Valley, and it's called A Soldier Remembers. And it was written, Lieutenant Colonel Amritpal Singh Johal, and it's a World War II veteran, a memoir. So again, it's a great book that you can download for free from the University of the Fraser Valley in Abbotsford, British Columbia. Again, these photos were from the Lieutenant Colonel's personal collection and were included in that book along with many others. And again, as I said, the prelogue for the book was written by himself. However, the foreword and intro to the book was actually written by Mr. Sajan, who was actually elevated all the way to be our Minister of Defense for Canada. So he really spoke out in the foreword of the book and honored him because he wanted to make sure that he was recognized for being such a leader to the Sikh community and inspired him to get involved in politics, in the military, and to develop his career to the absolute highest post in Canada that one in the military can get to. So again, thank you very much for indulging me on this report because, again, the more I read and the more I learn, it just blows me away. Just such an amazing hero, such a huge, huge representative on a global scale of what our main our principles of Canada are to welcome everyone equally. And it's just sad that he had to fight so hard to get that recognition, that equality, and the honors that he deserved, Angus.
Yeah, as the phrase goes, what a guy. I mean, you look back on his life and it sort of makes you reflect on your own life and think, God, what did I achieve compared to somebody like that? It was really quite an extraordinary life, and clearly he's lived his life to the full. And it's one of those weird quirks of the internet, isn't it? That quite often you see these stories about somebody's just passed, and they go viral, and it brings back the whole story of these people's lives. Then actually discover, well, actually they died 10 or 15 or sometimes 20 years ago, which again, it's just one of those weird quirks of the internet that when these things go viral. But what's even worse is if you're still alive and then the story of your death goes viral, which has of course happened as well. But anyway, but yeah,
that's usually what we see more of.
Well, exactly, yes. So, but anyway, let's just reflect a few points in his life. I mean, again, he was one of these great pioneers, and we do judge. We're always guilty of this, and not just us, but everybody. I think society is always very guilty of looking back quite critically at our past and saying, well, yeah, and looking at those generations that came before us through this lens of today's morality and culture and say, oh, how terrible they were. Well, actually, again, to sort of almost take a devil's advocate view here, when I watch, for example, television programs, comedy programs, the 1970s here in the UK, I wince at some of the language used, think, oh, God, that was outrageous, you can't say that. Well, but in those days you could, that was the culture. Those people didn't realise, certainly in the context of today, what they were saying was inherently wrong or morally wrong or racist, whatever. That was just the prevailing culture. They actually didn't think there was anything wrong with that. So it is very easy for us to judge in hindsight these people's culture and the things. And these veterans who refused entry on the grounds of headgear, well, it was a combination of, well, a cultural ingrained institutional racism, if you want to call it, again using the context of modern terminology, but ultimately this was just the culture. You can't blame these guys other than they just needed to understand actually how morally wrong what they were doing was. And again, it comes down to this sort of argument, well, it was headgear. He was just a stickler for the rules. That's basically what it came down to. But ultimately, you really have to salute people like this because they were the pioneers. And there's two elements. Firstly, just as a member of the Sikh community, wearing his dastar, it is an article of faith. It is not headgear, and he had to try and educate the prevailing culture, saying, "Look, this is not a beret that I can just remove. This is an article of faith. This is actually inherent in my religion. I cannot remove this without sacrificing a huge amount of what I stand for," which is a very, very different thing. And that was all part of this pioneering educational agenda, really, that the Sikh community have had to go through decades after decades, that even is so relevant today. Even though this guy died many years ago, his pioneering educational stance is as relevant today as it was back then, because even today we are still fighting this battle to educate all sorts of organisations, state bodies, private bodies, whoever it is. The dastar is not a piece of headgear that you can just casually remove. It is something more important than that. It is an actual article of faith, whether you're going through security at an airport, whether you're serving in the armed forces, or whether you're serving in the fire service. You cannot just simply remove this piece of what is not just simple headgear. It is an article of faith. And so he had to pioneer that. The other element of this, which I find slightly surprising, but not to another degree, is the fact that it involves the military. Now, of course, the military, the martial culture, the ability to be a soldier, this inherent, it's almost genetically built into the Sikh culture. is that they have this hugely rich, deep, wonderful history, military history. This is why the Sikhs were used as mercenaries for centuries, because they were recognised as being these great fighters. They were hugely high achieving in military sense. They just basically made very, very good soldiers because they were ingrained with deep courage and fighting ability. And again, this comes through all the way through to today, both in the armed services and in just general society in the sports. It comes out in a more peaceful manner in the sporting arena. But ultimately, ever since the 10th Guru and the establishment of the Khalsa and the 5 Articles of Faith, etc., and becoming a member of the council and becoming Amritpal Singh, all these elements have become a deep, unremovable part of their culture. So again, as highly achieving serving soldiers, and again we often talk about how they are some of the most highly decorated soldiers across any military that they serve in. It's surprising then that another part of the military family would then refuse them or denigrate their existence. And again, there is always a little bit of interregimental rivalry that has always existed, certainly in my day, and we always used to sort of have a lot of banter and worse with other regiments because it's just ingrained. It's a competitive spirit. That's what makes military so effective. But this goes beyond that. It was almost this institutional racism, stickling for the rules, whatever. But bless the Queen. I mean, I have to say, and again, it almost brought tears to my eyes. Again, reminding the Queen. The Queen is such an important figure for all of us here, particularly in the UK, because she's been there all our lives, or she was there all our lives. She was basically our national grandmother. And her passing is really, again, it brings tears to the eyes, even thinking about it again. But ultimately, the Commonwealth was so important to the Queen. One of the most important parts of the Queen's psyche, everything that she stood for wasn't just obviously standing as the monarch, but the Commonwealth meant so much to her. And the evidence throughout her entire life of how much she always stood up for and protected those members of her Commonwealth in any context. And this story, I think, really highlights that one single thing. I am not surprised in the least that the Queen not only responded to his letter positively and helped him fight his fight, but actually she then individually picked him out years later to have tea with. Again, it's all very on the surface, very sort of very simple, but it sent a very, very powerful message. The Queen never did anything without it having a very deep meaning. And this, just a simple cup of tea with this gentleman, sent a massive message saying, firstly, I recognise your fight, I salute your fight, I honour your fight, and I will always stand by you. That is what the Queen was like individually as a person. It's why she just won the love of everybody globally. When she passed, there was a global outpouring of grief because of what she stood for. But anyway, yeah, James, as I said, well done to this guy. Again, yeah, he died many years ago, but his battle is as relevant today as it was back then, James.
Certainly is. And I mean, when I go through it here on the show, it seems like kind of a short summary, like it happened within a short period of time, but it didn't. And it wasn't easy. He was receiving postal mail back in the day because, email wasn't the thing, but he would receive death threats in the mail. He would receive the most ignorant letters that I've actually read some of them. And he would receive death threat phone calls and all kinds of things, but he did not back down. It was ingrained in his personality, in his ethical code, in everything that was in his fabric to stand up and say, this is wrong, we're going to fix it, and I'm going to be the one to battle for that remediation of this bad policy. And he just went full steam ahead, continued doing what he was doing, but not through getting angry, not through throwing threats back at these people, but instead through education, through calmness, through awareness, and of course through the media. So again, he, at some point, some people referred to him as the king of the soundbite because he knew how to get the media with just certain words, and those words replayed over and over in some cases in the media. So again, what an amazing man.
Indeed, and of course, infused in his whole life was this innate desire, drive, motivation to stand up to oppression and persecution, which actually then leads me very conveniently onto to my two stories. And of course, I talked in the introduction about highlighting the failings of two governments, that of India and that of the British government. And of course, political prisoners are very much a part of, sadly, Indian society, despite the fact they claim to be a democracy. And when I talk about the failings of Indian government, it is a failing as a so-called democracy. And of course, I'm referring to, first of all, Jagtar Singh Johal, and secondly, I'll come on to Amritpal Singh after that. But firstly, Jaggy, and again, we talk regularly about Jaggy, and this is a story we will not let lie until he walks free, hopefully one day. Jagtar Singh Johal, who still resides now in his now into his 9th year. He's served 8 years in arbitrary detention in India, now serving his 9th year. His brother, who's a councillor, Gurpreet Singh, has been battling for years, ever since his detainment. He's been battling to free him, battling with not just the Indian government, but the British government to say, look, please, you've got to act to free my brother. He is a British citizen who has been detained illegally, arbitrarily. He has not been sentenced to anything yet, and yet he remains still in prison. The British government have done absolutely nothing about it. Anyway, so the latest update. Gurpreet was due to meet the British Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper. I'm going to start off with, this is a snippet from a report from the BBC. Well done to the BBC. I criticise the BBC on a regular basis for some of their failings, but one thing they have been very good at, and that is following this story, particularly BBC Scotland, because of course Jaggy is from Dumbarton in Dumbartonshire in Scotland. And this is the part of the BBC report that came out yesterday. Let me play this for you.
This is a familiar walk through Westminster for Gurpreet Singh Johal. In the 8 years his brother has been detained, there have been 8 foreign secretaries. Jagtar Singh Johal was arrested in India in 2017, accused of funding a terror plot, but he hasn't been convicted. His brother says this morning's meeting with Yvette Cooper was not positive.
It's been one of the most disappointing meetings that I've had with a Foreign Secretary, when we thought we were making progress with the previous Foreign Secretary and that they were taking steps to bring Jagtar back home. Today it's felt backwards.
Jagtar Singh Johal's family have lost faith in the Indian judicial system. Instead, they want the UK government to use back channels with the Indian government to push for a diplomatic solution. The family's Labour MP was at this morning's meeting with the Foreign Secretary.
Do you think the government is doing enough?
I think the government could do more now. We've been in office now for 17 months, and I think that initial honeymoon period is now over. And I appreciate that those talks have been ongoing with Indian counterparts, with the Indian Prime Minister Modi. But it's time as a UK government to really push now to secure the release of Jagtar Singh Johal.
The Foreign Office has previously said it continues to raise concerns about Mr Johal's prolonged detention with the Government of India and has made clear that faster progress is needed. The Indian authorities say due process is being followed. Katie Hunter reporting Scotland, Westminster.
India says due process is being followed. I mean, I just I chuckle disgustedly at that. Anyway, Gurpreet, his brother, actually made a separate statement, and I just want to play this statement as well, just again to highlight some of the key points here.
Hi, I've not long came out of the meeting with the Foreign Secretary. It's been one of the most disappointing meetings I've had in the last 8 years. It felt as if we were going backwards. Despite a clear plan, a clear strategy provided to the Foreign Secretary, she's not engaged at all with it. And she has decided to take a different route, which could see Jagtar languish in jail for nearly 40 years because of no realistic approach for what she is making. I have left a lot of views on my perspective, from me, the family, the disappointment, and I'm genuinely hoping and being optimistic about this, that she will take those views on board and change her mind and follow the strategy that has been given to her. I am sincerely disappointed. I am now going to have to go back to Dumbarton, explain to the family of how backwards we've fallen. So I require your continued support to put the pressure on the Foreign Secretary in order for her to change her mind and provide diplomatic representation to bring Jagtar back home.
And as he took his train back up to Scotland, he posted up on his Facebook page, just reiterating how much he heard just empty talk, same failed approach. and no evidence, and there's no end in sight, etc., etc. So, again, I talk about failings of the British government. I mean, we had the BBC interviewed Douglas McAllister, his Jaggy's own MP. I'm going to have to say well done to Douglas McAllister. He's been actually quite vocal. He's stood up in every opportunity in Parliament to raise it with his boss, Starmer, Surrender Starmer, as they call him. And it's interesting that Gurpreet, once again, has met his 8th Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper. And again, regular viewers of this show know my feelings about this Labour government. This Labour government is literally one of the worst governments this nation has had in its history. And that's not just me saying that. That is just polls. It is also statistics, etc. They are failing in every single aspect. I have literally, in my long life, I have never known a government of any colour be so incompetent, so useless, and therefore so unpopular. It just defies belief. Again, I'm almost speechless at the failings of this government in every area, whether it's economically, social policy, whatever. But certainly when it comes to Jagtar Singh Johal, and I said this actually when they came in, I hate to say I told you so, but unfortunately this government was elected certainly with a lot of the support from the Sikh community. Because it made lots of promises. Well, I hate to say it, but this government made a lot of promises to all parts of British society and has not just failed in delivering, it's actually literally lied. And those, again, in the UK, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about because it's headline news on a daily basis. But for our global audience, our government is literally, Starmer is going to fall very soon. There's no doubt Starmer will go and he will take his useless cabinet with him, part of which is Yvette Cooper. Yvette Cooper is our Foreign Secretary, and when Yvette Cooper took over from David Lammy, an equally incompetent, useless Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper took the ministry, and I said at the time, she is a hopeless politician. She has failed at just about every role that she has ever had. She's been in politics in the Labour Party for many, many years, and pretty much everything that she has been in charge of, she's failed at. So I hate to say I told you so, but she's failed at this. If Gurpreet is surprised, I am deeply sorry, but this is par for the course. Certainly with somebody like Yvette Cooper. Yvette Cooper was never going to deliver. She is absolutely hopeless. But this government, this Labour government, was never going to deliver. It's never going to deliver on the 1984 inquiry. It promised in opposition to deliver. It's never going to deliver on Jagtar Singh Johal. It's never going to deliver on all these other issues that affect the Sikh community, transnational oppression, etc., that it promised it would deal with, that it would cover. It is failing. It has failed not just the whole of British society, but particularly it has failed our community, our Sikh community, on all these issues. And most of all, and most hurtful of all, of course, for the family of Jagtar Singh Johal, is its complete and utter lack of action on Jagtar Singh Johal. It is, as I say, I'm utterly speechless, but not surprised, again, at this failings. And poor Gurpreet, who's battled for years, battling every successive Foreign Secretary, he's now come up against this political blancmange, this tasteless, flavourless, pointless blancmange of a Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, who has basically said, well, whatever. She said nothing. And he's had to take the train back to Scotland to break the news to the family. I'm sorry, but we're now dealing with a Foreign Secretary who's even more useless than the last one. Now, I just want to highlight, this came up on my Facebook feed just a couple of days ago. Tan Desai, again, this is one of our 11 Sikh MPs that we have in the UK. And he's actually done some great work, Tan. He's a very good politician. But he posted this up a few days ago. And he says, the UK has shown moral and political leadership in our continent by supporting the Ukraine against Putin's illegal actions. Now, he's the defence minister now. Tan's had a great career. Again, a wonderful indictment of how Sikhs can succeed in politics, certainly here in the UK. But he posts this up when one of his own community is actually in arbitrary detention in India, his own community, and he's not vocal. He's done absolutely next to nothing, has Tan Desai. And he's another example, and I'm sorry to say this, Tan, but again, it's all about career before principles. One of your own is sitting in jail, has been sitting in jail for over 8 years with no sentence. He's basically a political prisoner in India. Your government, your boss, your party has done absolutely nothing about it. What are you doing about it? You're talking about the moral and political leadership of your government. You're talking about Ukraine. Yeah, great, well done and all that. but one of your own is still sitting in jail. What are you doing about it? I actually can't see any real effective public announcements from your behalf as a member of our government, as a minister in our government. What are you doing about it? Why is it only down to Douglas McAllister, Jaggy's own MP, to raise it when you're one of your own community, you're not raising it either. So again, James, I'm just deeply saddened, but not surprised in the least, that this government, which actually ironically is likely to fall, I think, in the foreseeable future, not just Starmer and what's her name, Rachel Reeves, thieves as we call her, are useless. Again, I just don't even want to go down that rabbit hole, but they're going to go because they have been, as I say, one of our most incompetent governments literally in our history. Unfortunately, Jagtar and his family are suffering as an indirect response to all that because, again, they don't care. They don't even care about running this country properly. They certainly don't care about a member of our Sikh community, James. As I said, I'm just absolutely, utterly appalled, but not surprised.
It's just something that, I always say, well, I'm trying to think positive. I'm trying to be positive and try to give the benefit of the doubt that there's some kind of backdoor channel that's being, open and closed, that they keep trying to work it through. And this really makes me think that maybe I've been wrong. Maybe there is not as much back channel dealing as I had hoped and anticipated. And that is a shame because, again, this is an arbitrary detention that is without merit. A lot of the so-called charges that the India state had forwarded, some have been thrown out. And there is, as you've referred to, double jeopardy, Angus, that they are almost identical in what's been thrown out versus what he still faces. And therefore, you can't have it both ways. Either they are or they are not legitimate. So, and this to the global stage looks like they are not legitimate charges. That again, it was because of the research that he was doing to hold the India government accountable and not in any way, shape or form to do with anything of terroristic activities. We also need to take a quick moment, Angus, to remind our viewers that when we in the West think of terrorism charges, we think of the worst. We think of 9/11. We think of all of these, images in our head. But in India, so much as just suggesting independence for Khalistan, so much for just suggesting that there be some type of independence and sovereignty for J&K. These things can label you a terrorist. You can face charges for that. So again, if you're in the Western world and you hear that T word, it is a total watered down and non-impactful word in India as it is in the West. So again, just so that you understand what we're looking at here, and for him to speak out against Modi and the government and the history of the India government and how it treated Sikhs and others, that again is considered terroristic activities under their Unlawful Activities Acts, among others. So again, just to be clear so that you understand the difference here. So don't let India play that word game to try and to scare people into supporting them.
Indeed, and to compare and contrast the failings of the British government to the failings of the Indian government. The Indian government, as you rightly refer to, James, some of their failings is, of course, as a democracy. And the other political prisoner I'm talking about today is, of course, Amritpal Singh. Amritpal Singh, I've got to rush through this because we're running out of time already, but Amritpal Singh, of course, he likewise is in prison. Despite the fact he is an elected member of the Lok Sabha in India, he resides in prison because essentially he had the temerity to stand up and hold the Indian government to account for its failings as a so-called democratic nation, and he was his legal representatives were back in court over the last few days. Again, to try and secure his release, or at least, even not if not his release, at least his ability to appear in the Lok Sabha to undertake his obligations as an elected member of the Lok Sabha. So, but the Punjab government itself told the Punjab and Haryana High Court, where the case is being heard, that even a single speech by Amritpal Singh in Parliament could, in their words, set the Five Rivers on fire. This is absolutely astonishing. This. The government's own advocate, a guy called Anupam Gupta, warned that granting Amritpal access to the Lok Sabha would effectively give him an unrestricted national and international stage. Well, yeah, that's what an elected politician and being in the Lok Sabha is all about. And his advocate said, if he's permitted to participate, he will acquire an actual physical, constructive or virtual platform of national and global scale. Well, yes, that's what the obligation is as a member of the Lok Sabha. A single speech can set the five rivers on fire, he told the court, contending that such a platform posed a serious danger to the safety and survival of Punjab. Interesting statement. This is, again, I find this quite explosive because basically what you're saying, and again, this reflects more on the Indian government than on Amritpal Singh. What you're saying is if you allow Amritpal Singh to make a speech, it poses a serious danger to the safety and survival of Punjab. No, it doesn't. It poses a serious danger to the safety and survival of the BJP RSS government. In other words, you are afraid of letting an elected member of your nation to speak publicly because he might hold you to account. He might highlight the illegal activities of what you're up to. That's really what it boils down to. Now, the remarks were made during this latest hearing of his petition to try and get at least a temporary release to attend Parliament, basically to undertake his obligations as an MP. Amritpal's counsel, a guy called R.S. Baines, countered that the state's apprehensions were exaggerated. Now, of course, his advocate has had to take a very diplomatic line. He's basically just trying to get Amritpal released, even temporarily. And the line he's taking is, look, it's just be reasonable. He just wants to undertake his actions as an elected member of the Lok Sabha, even temporarily or even virtually. Let him appear at least on a video screen. And he said, look, you can't stop him unless you actually have evidence to prove why there is a real and present danger that you're claiming. And he said that the Punjab government exercised its discretion in rejecting his plea for release, but discretion can't be absolute. You can't just do it just because you want to. You've actually got to show what he says has to be connected to some material, in other words, some evidence. Hundreds, and he went on to say, look, this isn't about political or a threat to the Indian state. This is just about, for example, hundreds of his own villages in his constituency are underwater because of course, the recent flooding we've had. And it's important for him to raise their issues before Parliament. He has actually, and also the precedent's been set, he has actually been released temporarily, at least to attend the session, and he didn't, even when he did that, he didn't violate any conditions. So what are you afraid of? And in response, Gupta, the government lawyer, came back and said that he allegedly is circulating a hit list of physical elimination of his opponents and critics while in jail. And again, I just shake my head. Oh, really? Do you honestly think Amritpal Singh is circulating a so-called hit list to the implication is to kill his political opponents? I think the chances of that are absolutely zero. He doesn't even need to do that. We do know that is the tactic of the Indian government, but Amritpal Singh, there's no way he's going to do that. But anyway, of course, they're having to fabricate evidence, which of course is a common tactic with the Indian government, as we do know. And he said, we apprehend that he would use his ability to speak in a manner that could have profound and inalterable consequences for the security of the state and public order, given his background and bent of mind. And Amritpal Singh's own advocate again said, look, he tried to argue, look, why at least don't you let him appear in virtual mode? In other words, put up a television screen to allow him to at least talk. And again, the government are fighting against that, even despite the fact that Baines, the advocate, said, look, you can switch it off. If you don't like what he's saying, you can switch it off. But again, the government lawyers are saying, no, we don't even want that. So what are they afraid of, James? It's very clear that Amritpal Singh is a fighter for democracy. He's a fighter for the rights of Punjab. We do know, of course, he's standing on a pro-Khalistan ticket, but ultimately he is an elected member of the Lok Sabha. He is an elected politician representing the voice of many people, and certainly in the elections last year, he was elected on a record landslide, one of the highest landslide victories in that region. In history, in electoral history, certainly since 1947. So this guy is democratically elected, yet the Indian government is refusing to allow him to even speak in public. What are they afraid of? I think we know, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And let's not forget that there is a movement within the BJP and other circles that they want to actually be able to oust any member of parliament or other politicians who do not show up or cannot show up for the within the parliament. If they are charged with any serious crime or accused of any serious crime. And I bring those very pointedly, those words to your attention, because of the fact that it does not mean convicted. It means accused. It means, charged with. And if you are incarcerated, that you potentially could face a long term. So they want to pass this bill that allows them to reject people such as Amritpal Singh and say, nope, sorry, he was accused of something now. He has to go away, and we'll try to select somebody else that we can get into office there that is more in line with our views and our political party's goals down the road. And I think that that is one of the big reasons they're concerned, because if this bill does pass, now that time clock restarts, because now they've shown that he can represent his constituents within the parliament by video or in person. And for them to say, well, he's been in prison for this long, now that clock would restart again. And I think that's what they're afraid of, because they know that he represents the inevitability of Khalistan being formed, a sovereign nation, and I think that's what it comes down to, Angus.
As I say, the word I use is explosive. I don't think people realise how significant this is. The Indian government has now publicly said if we let him speak publicly, he could set the Five Rivers on fire. And yet the Indian government says the Khalistan movement is a fringe movement. Really? Well, then why are you so afraid to let Amritpal Singh? Because in your own words, it could set the Five Rivers on fire. In other words, we know that you're terrified of Amritpal Singh. You're terrified of the Khalistan movement. You realise it is a majority movement and it is going to happen. So, and again, I'm going to use the word banana republic. India is not a democracy. India cannot call itself a democracy whilst it does this. It silences one of its political critics. That is not the actions of a democracy. Those are the actions of a banana republic. And again, back to the British government, we are shaking hands and doing deals with this government without even mentioning things like this. I'm absolutely appalled and ashamed at the British government. I'm not surprised with the Indian government. This is par for the course, as it appears. But for the British government to endorse this, again, that's another story. Right, James, we must rush on because the clock is... we've only got a few minutes for our comments today.
Way over.
Absolutely. So I'm going to rush through our comments. Thank you to all our wonderful audience for all the comments that you sent in. Loads. A couple of long ones. I'm just going to, again, quickly flick through these. TC, again, one of our regulars. Thank you, TC. You highlight the fact that about how... this is about my podcast with Dr. Greywell, where we compared... and showed the similarities between the rise of the Nazi Party and, of course, the rise of the RSS. The parallels are quite scary. Of course, terrorist cults, as you call it, TC, we do need to profile and analyse these. And you talk about, again, these Kesadari Hindus, Hindutvas, basically these fake Sikhs that we often refer to. The point you raise here is that even some of these fake Sikhs who are acting on behalf of the RSS have fallen foul of their masters, their paymasters, and have actually mysteriously disappeared. So again, it just highlights some of these dangerous tactics of the RSS. If you fall foul of the RSS, you better be looking over your shoulder. And I'm going to tie this also into Punjab's, again, very long but very interesting comment. Punjab refers to these Kesadari, these Kesadari Hindus, these fake Sikhs. As you say, this comparison, you say, don't think that not every Hindu thinks like the RSS when it comes to building a Hindu nation. And this double negative basically says what you're saying is every single Hindu will stand shoulder to shoulder when it comes down to it with the RSS. And then you talk about these Kesadari Hindus. And you talk about a little bit of the history behind it, but what the important points coming out here is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji gave a hukam: if a Sikh isn't carrying 5 weapons on themselves, they are not my Sikhs. In other words, to become an Amrit Dari Sikh, a member of the Khalsa, you have to carry the 5 Ks. How many heed this hukam? On top, he said, if Sikhs start practicing pagan rituals like the Hindus, I won't bless them. How many Sikhs are true to the faith? Only a tiny minority, as you say. There was a price on every Sikh's head. Do you think that price isn't on their heads today? To those who think that there is no price, how do you explain Panjar, Nijar, Singh Kanda, Hardeep Singh Nijar and Jagtar Singh Johal, etc., their murders or the incarceration of Amritpal Singh? In other words, the RSS are all in it together. The fake Sikhs are all in it together. This is what we need to watch out for. The RSS, as we say, the tentacles are widespread, they are powerful, and they are also using these fake Sikhs, James. We have to be aware of it and be careful of it.
Absolutely, and let's not forget that when you try to state that that all the Hindus would stand shoulder to shoulder. Don't forget that even in the genocide era, when there were things going on and targeting of the Sikhs, there were Hindus that stood up and said, no, this is wrong, and gave them shelter and protection. So I think that that might be an exaggeration. I do think that a lot would stand up at shoulder to shoulder to back the RSS and the Hindutva, but I do believe that there are others of genuine and pure heart that would stand up and demand what was right, not what was being dictated.
Yeah, and one of the phrases that springs to mind is silence is complicity. And this, again, we're referring back to 1930s
right.
Germany. There were those who were totally against the Nazi party, but they had to remain silent, literally, because they were afraid of their lives. And silence is complicity, sadly, in reality. And it'll be the same with the Hindus. Yes, many Hindus did protect Sikhs, but ultimately those who remain silent, as many do even today, even though they disagree with the RSS, they are complicit in this RSS potential atrocity. Peace Lovers says, but fear not, the Brahmins, they're not as strong as the Nazis. The Brahmins are a third copy of the Nazis, which will be teared up easily in the future. In other words, don't worry, the Brahmins, they may be powerful now, but they're not a patch on the Nazis, James.
Yeah, there you go, right?
Kuljit Mangat, there's some very nice comments. Thank you, because it was a fascinating podcast, actually. And as I say, the parallels were quite scary with the Nazi Party, the rise of the RSS. And the ending was, as Azad says, the ending was with a great message, Dr. Grewal. The final message that Dr. Grewal said was basically, look, they can control us physically, but they can't control our minds. And this is why they're so afraid of the Sikhs, and particularly the whole Sikh religion, is that they fear the teachings of the gurus. In other words, the teachings of the gurus are how Sikhs live their lives. And even if you physically control them, you cannot control their minds, because their minds are always ultimately loyal to the teachings of the gurus, James.
Yeah, and it reminds me also of Nelson Mandela and his theory that you cannot, that he never gave up his mind, his sanity, his beliefs, and his faith in himself and humanity as a whole. When he was imprisoned arbitrarily. So again, I just see a lot of parallels in history and how it may repeat itself, but at the same time, if we take time to learn about the history and the mistakes, then at least we can hopefully avoid some of them.
Indeed, learning from the past. And Surjit Keller says, well, free Jaggy, poor Jaggy, as you say, does look in a bad way. But what, amongst the sort of the wonderful war cries of Boli So Nihal and Sat Sri Akal, you say, oh, what the heck, let's just have another partition, James. Yes, well, that's what we're battling for. We do need another partition. We do need the division of that whole western strip of India to become Khalistan.
That's right, and that's what we're talking about and why we are here on the air.
And thank you, Gurpreet, for your comment, your compliment about my Punjabi. Well, I chuckle. My Punjabi is as good as Google Translate gets, but I do my best. But thank you for your appreciation. And then, we had lots of comments saying, right, you're right, sir. Yes, well, we stand for what is right, what is the truth. And Harry Singh says, a great show. Well, thank you. And again, as always, on the final page, I do like to pay tribute to those of you, particularly names that we don't see very often, or newcomers to the channel. Thank you for your support. Do keep watching us. Do spread the word. But every comment that you drop in there, even just the one word, is like right. Thank you. We do appreciate it, because it does mean hopefully we are on the right track, James.
Absolutely. And again, even if it's just the one word comment or the share with friends or whatever, again, it helps to push us past the blocks of the algorithms that are trying to shadow ban us on the different platforms. So again, you can be a part of helping us to get the message out as well.
Indeed. And the final words of the show go to both Lakhwinder Singh and Baldev Singh. Khalistan Zindabad. Indeed, Khalistan Zindabad is what it's all about. And as I say, amongst the failings of our governments, we know what we need, James. That's an independent new government, the government of Khalistan, which we know will be a little bit more competent and a little bit more democratic.
Absolutely, and a lot more inclusive, and we won't see repeats of things such as the Legion when it comes to acceptance and open hearts and open arms in Khalistan.
In other words, what's not to like? Absolutely. But there we must draw things to a close for another day. Thanks so much for watching. Do keep your comments coming in. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satlugetv.com if there's any you'd like to bring to our attention directly. But yeah, do let us know things that we might have missed, or interesting snippets or rumours that you hear on the grapevine or see on the internet. we're always enjoy researching these things and bring the truth out to you as much as we can. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. It's a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
Another day from Perspectives. We will see you next time.